Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen, to a long-sought deck tech. I haven't done one of these in a little while. Welcome. It's also happy Thanksgiving to everybody. It's a nice little Thanksgiving Thursday here in 2020. So, yeah, for those that want to watch now or watch later, you're welcome to do either. I've been requested to do some breakdowns, some deck techs, some advice on how to build decks, whether we're looking for casual or competitive. And this deck happens to be one of my newer decks with an older commander, but I've been having a lot of fun with it, so I just wanted to show you what I've been doing with this. So the first thing you want to do when you're building any kind of deck, you really want to look at what do you want? And I often recommend, if you have a pile of legendary commanders, creatures, just go through them. And then ask yourself, what do you want? Are you looking for a more competitive deck? Are you looking for something that always wins, goes for the combo lines, or has an incredible aggro, and you just go for it? Is that what you're looking for? Or are you looking for having maybe a little more fun, or trying some wacky theme? Like, I've seen themes where everybody has a face looking to the left. Or themes where all the creatures are bald, or they're all angels or elves or whatever. So knowing what you want your deck to do, I often tell people when they're building a deck, in the best case scenario, what's going on in a game for you? In other words, you got, turn 5, 6, 7, whatever the heck it is. Where do you picture your best game going? And how do you repeat that? In other words, if for you, what you want is 20 elves turned sideways attacking, then that's what we want to build. If instead it's locking down a deck or going for that combo on turn 3, that's what you build. So knowing what you want with your deck is really important, and it really does start with your commander, because of course the commander is your color identity. The commander also tells you roughly if you're going to get extra bonuses from that commander. Maybe he'll give you extra mana or draw or some kind of stacks piece or Voltron strategy, whatever it is. So always start with the commander and the kind of deck you want to see. So that's what I did here. Neheb has been several other decks. Originally, it was the Heartless Hidesizu, which is the one that where if you tap it, everybody takes half their life in damage. The downside of that particular strategy of deck was there was no advantage to me, so I immediately had to build in effects that countered that, and it was actually counterintuitive. So I changed the deck a little bit because this one gives you some fun advantage. So let me just tell you about Neheb if you haven't seen this before. I think he was played quite a bit more in the past and just not as favored currently. Let me get this guy on camera. Oh, there's the camera. So he has Legendary Minotaur Warrior, Zombie as well, has all the nice effects. He's a 5-drop. And he has Afflict, which I don't think is on a lot of cards. Affliction basically says even if you were to block, you would still lose 3 life. Okay, and that plays into his secondary ability. At the beginning of your second main phase, so post-combat, you gain red mana equal to the amount of life lost this turn by your opponents. So even if they're tapping an Ancient Tomb anywhere in your main phase or combat phase, they took damage, and now that counts towards your total. And that's really important in how I built this particular deck, because all I want to do is do lots of damage effects, global damage effects to all my opponents, and then on my main phase 2, try to take advantage of that with a wheel effect or an X spell or something fun like that. So that's how I've built him, and what I'm going to do is show you my breakdown and how I do things, and just maybe give you guys some different ideas on how to build your own decks. So knowing that it's a 5-drop, I'm immediately, a lot of people would say, well, that's out of the range of a competitive deck. It also happens to be a monocolor, which a monocolor red, it has some weaknesses and limitations. I've built all 5 monocolors. Red by itself, without the commander being able to help you with draw or tutor, is incredibly difficult. There's not a lot of ramp. There's not a lot of tutors. There's not a lot of draw outside of wheel effects or ones that make you discard cards to your graveyard. So you rely heavily on artifacts and wheel effects, basically. So I'll walk you through all that. But red is a hard color to build, but I like building it and knowing it and having one because it, each color represents different abilities and lack of abilities. And so kind of challenging yourself in a monocolor is one way to go. All right, so we'll start with the lands first. So lands, this particular deck is going to be heavy on basic lands because I actually damage and hurt people based on their non-basic lands. Stuff like Blood Moon effects and Price of Progress. I'll run you through that in a little bit. So let's see, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 27 basic lands, which is a lot. It's a lot, but it's also you're in mono red, so you shouldn't really need anything but red. But I did throw in some non-basics, so I'll show you what they are. And they have to be important for me to want to have them in this particular build. So this one gives any creature haste, which I don't have a lot of creatures in this deck. I'll show you those in a second. But the few that I have, including my commander, being able to give it haste is really important. Hey, Gil, happy Thanksgiving to you. The next one is Wasteland. And honestly, I think this belongs in a lot of decks, or Strip Mine. I put Wasteland in here primarily because this to me is a casual build. I could have put in Strip Mine, but I'm more going to punish people for having non-basic lands versus going after their basic island or whatever. So that's why Wasteland's in here. It's more for flavor. Mikokoro, again, I don't have a lot of draw effects, so a global draw is one of the ways I'm going to go on this. I didn't put all of them in there. I didn't do your temple bells and all that stuff. This was more just kind of value and may make a cut at some point, but for right now, extra draw helps. Emergence Zone. Every single deck should have this in their deck. Wow. Every deck should have this in their deck. It's an uncommon, it's a non-basic land, and you can sack it to give all your spells flash until end of turn. You have no idea how important this can be in a clutch moment to be able to flash in a sorcery or a creature or an artifact on an end step or in response to something. Highly, highly, highly recommend. This should be in every deck, just like a Soul Ring. It really, really should, and I don't see enough people playing this. Spine Rock Knoll. This is one of those hideaway lands. Now, in general, I'm able to do 7 damage on a turn, so getting this out is whatever. It's just value. It's fun, and it comes into play tap, so that's a downside, but just value. Same thing with Valakut. I've never actually gotten this to go off. I didn't realize, if you haven't seen Valakut before, not only does it come into play tapped, in order to do the damage effect, you actually have to have, I believe it's 5 other mountains in play. So this is not a turn 2 effect. This is a turn 5, 6, 7. It takes a while. So it's more of a mid to late game strategy and more just value. And then finally, because I run across a lot of combo players and blue control, Besiju. It's definitely, if you want to get your spells off and you're going to put a lot of mana into something, you want to make sure you've got an uncounterable spell. So next I'm going to go into the creatures. And again, this is not a heavy creature deck, primarily because I want to do a lot of sorcery and instant damage. But there's a few I put in here. And when I break things down, I do it by the CMC. So at the beginning, you'll see the early CMC, and then I range upwards. So you'll see bigger and splashier effects as we go up because it'll cost more. So Dockside Extortion is, funny enough, I've been playing in a lot of casual pods where people just, when this is able to come out on turn 2, 3, 4, people don't have a lot of artifacts out. So this is more of a meta for artifact heavy or more combo or CDH builds where people have all their mana rocks out by turn 2, 3, or 4. But in a more casual pod, I've actually gotten only 1 or 2 tokens off this, not a lot. But still an auto-include in almost any deck that has a splash of red. Magus of the Wheel. Again, I said I have a lot of wheel effects, so this is yet another one. Then we have Gutter Snipe. This is more just value because I do play about 30% instants and sorceries. So being able to do 2 damage to each opponent every time I cast an instant or sorcery, that's a win in my book. But that's one of the few creatures in here, followed by Tectonic Giant. This one may make a cut at some point in the future. He may be reduced by that Hull Breacher guy, the mono red one. I can't remember what his name is. The pirate, I think he is. I can't. Oh, no, not the new wheel. The new wheel effect may replace this. Wheel of Misfortune. So Tectonic Giant has a few abilities. Whenever he attacks or becomes the target of a spell, so if someone wants to get rid of him, you get to choose one of these abilities. You can deal 3 damage to each opponent, or exile the top 2 cards of your library and cast them at any time until the end of turn. So the 3 damage to each opponent is really relevant here, because if I'm able to attack with him or someone tries to remove him on my main phase and I have Neheb out, well, if I have 3 opponents, that's 3, 6, 9. I have now 9 damage I've done total, and Neheb will have 9 floating mana on main phase 2. So there's just great synergy here, and that's why he's in there. He's also only a 4-drop for that ability. And then finally, Wartrief Giant, which there's a lot of similarity in what these two do. They're both trying to hit all the opponents. So this one literally hits each opponent, and this one creates an attacker for each opponent. So if you haven't seen Myriad before, Myriad is basically the ability to make copies of a creature, and they come out attacking. So in general, I'll attack either a planeswalker or a player with no blockers for this particular guy, and then I just throw the other tokens at other people. If they get through, great. If not, no big deal, but it's a great chance to get extra value. This doesn't have trample, so that's a downside, but in general, I clear enough boards with the other spells, you'll see that that's not usually a problem. And then we're back to that. So only, let's see, 6 total creatures, including the commander. So again, very low creature count. All right, let's move on to the enchantments. The enchantments, again, very few of them. I'll run them over, and I feel that the enchantments that are in this deck are integral to making this deck work. Again, starting at the lower CMC. So for this particular one, I found a Quest for Pure Flame, and it's a 1-drop. Again, this is not a turn 1 threat. It's not a turn 2, 3, or 4 threat. Usually, I've got to hit you 3, 4 times with different effects before this becomes relevant. And what it does is basically you sack it, so it's a one-time use, and you get to do double damage on the turn that you sacked it. As long as there's 4 or more counters on it. So, not bad, a little fun. Blood Moon, great control, locks down a lot of decks that play non-basic lands. There's nothing else about it. This is a staple in most red decks, especially if it's a mono-red deck. Aggravated Assault. This is kind of combo-y if you have the ability to make it work. So what I mean by that is, as long as you're generating at least 5 mana, every time you hit the players, you'll be able to untap this. Now, something to be aware of, this gives you an additional combat and an additional main phase. So let's say I attack and I do 4, and I happen to have 5 to untap him, and that's my attack main phase 1, and then combat main phase 2, I have 4 mana floating plus 1 to untap. So I activate this, right? I take an additional attack. This second main phase will see the damage I did the first combat and the second combat, which would be a total of 8. So now I've generated 8 to untap this yet again, and you can see very easily how this becomes infinite. Infinite attacks with infinite mana. So that's literally the combo right there. So it's worth taking a look at that when you can create a 1-card combo with your commander, and it's not hard to pull off. I haven't yet, but it's not hard to pull off. Again, this is a newer deck. I haven't had a lot of chance with it. So that's one piece. Stranglehold. This one's a little bit controversial for me because it's going more into the stacks territory. A friend of mine suggested it. I'm still debating on it, but it is pretty helpful. It basically says that all your fetches are turned off, all your tutors are turned off, and if somebody wants to try to take an extra turn, that's turned off too. It's pretty darn useful as it only smacks your opponents. But it is a 4-drop, and it may not be for everybody, so that's kind of middling if I'm going to keep it forever. Then we have Court of Ire. This is a newer one. I want to run you through this. Again, this is just value. When it ETBs, you become the Monarch. Monarch being that token that says you get to draw an additional card on your end step as long as no one did damage to you that turn, combat damage. At the beginning of your upkeep, Court of Ire deals 2 damage to any target. If, however, you're the Monarch, it deals 7 damage to that player or permanent instead. So basically, on your upkeep, if you're the Monarch, you get to do additional damage. It's really just value. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this either. I haven't got to test it out yet. But again, if I'm playing in a more casual pod, I enjoy effects like this. They're fun. And people usually have time to respond to them either by trying to get the Monarch token from you or, not. But that's something kind of fun. And then finally, because I just love big splashy cards, the mana or the damage tripler, Fiery Emancipation. Now you got to be aware of this. I read this wrong originally. I thought this said whenever I deal damage to any opponent, they take triple that damage. But it does say whenever damage would be dealt. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent player, it deals triple that damage. Some of my spells deal damage to me as well, and like Heartless Hit Assidu. So I had to be aware of that and remove and play around with some of my spells because this could easily kill me with some of the spells you're about to see. And that's my enchantments. Next, we're going to run into, I'll keep the instants and sorceries last because they're the heaviest damage doing and the most that show the power of Neheb. So next up are the artifacts. And in any deck that you're building, I highly recommend kind of looking into the artifacts and discussing, is this the right artifact for me? Not only the cost of it in American dollars, but also the CMC, is it worth it in this deck? There are ways to turn off artifacts. The three that come to mind, you've got a Stony Silence, you got Collector Oof, these are white and green, and then of course Null Rod, which is an artifact that turns off artifacts. Outside of that, there are some other things like Linvala that turn off activated abilities, and then there's many, many ways to blow up artifacts. So just be aware that artifact hate is a real thing. That being said, I'll run you through my package. So I have Mana Crypt out there, Mana Vault, and Elixir of Immortality. The reason this is in here, one, it's just a little bit of life gain. Two, much more importantly, I have a lot of wheel effects that don't recur my graveyard. This is literally the only way I have to recur the graveyard, so this is a very important piece for me. Sensei Top, being able to, look at the top three and draw it, very, very important. Soul Ring, again, more mana rocks like Thought Vessel, Fire Diamond, Arcane Signet, Grim Monolith right here, Mind Stone. Now, a lot of these, I just want to show you real quick. The ones that lock down to the point you have to untap them, with Neheb's secondary ability, sometimes I just go ahead and untap the artifacts that like Basalt Monolith that needs that extra stuff. So just something to be aware of. In this particular build, it's not that difficult to untap this. That being said, in a more casual build, if you don't have auto ways to untap your artifacts, things like Grim Monolith, Basalt Monolith are not as useful because you're not getting the maximum value out of them. Mind Stone, which is also good for extra draw, Felwar Stone. You notice that the CMC of all these are basically 2. So 2 is kind of the sweet spot on a lot of these. Mind Crank is great, fun. It's added value. It's not really on theme other than the fact that I do damage to my opponents a lot. And Mind Crank also sometimes can be coercive to get your opponents to attack each other because they know they're just going to get more value out of milling their opponents. Not always, but sometimes. Lightning Greaves, just to be able to give haste and also protection to my commander. Prismatic Vista, or Lens. And then finally we get to our first 3 drops. So that's all these are under 3. Just be aware of that. If you're trying to build a deck that wants to get things going, sometimes you're going to need a lot of cheaper artifacts to get that on level. Basalt Monolith is our first 3 drop. Commander Sphere. Aether Flux. Now, why is Aether Flux in here? Honestly, it's not impossible for me. I don't combo, but to do a lot of value plays. I don't have a lot of life gain outside of that bottle you saw a minute ago, but I do have a lot of spells, a lot of cheap spells, and the ability to generate mana for other spells. And sometimes I'm casting enough in a turn that I actually gain value on this. So that's more or less why it's in there, is the life gain strategy, a unique piece for that. Here we go. This is a nice older reserve list card. A lot of people don't know about this. This is Gauntlet of Might, printed in Alpha Beta Unlimited, not in Revised. All red creatures gain +1/+1, and all mountains provide the extra red mana. So this will affect your other opponents as well as it affects everybody, but it's a 4-drop. I play a lot more red than I think most other people do, and so in general, I'll have more value there. We have a Vidalcan Ori, because again, being able to cast stuff at instant speed is clutch. So I highly recommend looking into stuff like this if you don't have a lot of instants natively in your deck to begin with. And then Almart's Archive. This is another fun one right here. This a little bit of a combo with Aether Flux, because when I gain life, I gain double life. But the value here really is in the draws. This allows me, when I do a wheel effect, to draw twice as many cards. So normally everybody else gets to draw 7, I will draw 14, and the value is insane. Archive, really, really good card when you're playing in a more casual format. And then finally, Coveted Jewel. Again, another casual card. I love this card. It's really fun. For those that haven't seen it before, it's a 6-drop, which is huge. It's 1 more than a Gilded Lotus. When it comes into play, though, it has the added effect of drawing 3 cards. And it gives you the 3 mana like a Gilded Lotus would. So there's just immediate value there. It has an additional ability. If someone would do combat damage to you with a creature, they then get this card and then get to untap and then get to draw the cards and activate the ability. But more importantly, on the next turn, you can hit them back and regain the value. So in a game where you maybe have a friend in the game and they're working with you, you guys can hit each other back and forth with little 1-drops. So this is just a really fun card. I really like it. It's super clutch in a lot of times, and I think for 1 extra mana, if you're already playing a Gilded Lotus, you should look into this Coveted Jewel. All right, so those are the artifacts, and next I'm going to get into the instants. And the instants, there's 2 cards I'm thinking about upgrading to being what I call big flex cards. And I'll let you guys give me some comments on that if you think this book deserves the big flex treatment. And what I mean by big flex, I mean putting in cards that are ridiculously expensive, either because they're the original art and the original card, or because it's a certain judge foil or something like that. All right, so the first one is Shock. This is basically a lesser lightning bolt, but why not have both, which is exactly what I have. I have both. So the first one I'm looking at possibly replacing, I love this particular art, but I do happen to have an Alpha Lightning Bolt, which also has some pretty outstanding art and just an amazing look. My only concern about this, I play my expensive cards, so I play Workshops, I play Time Twisters, that's not a big deal. Does this really, will this grab the attention, to be honest? Because a lot of people may think this is a beta, or I don't know, they may not realize what it is for the sexiness, so I want them to see that I'm playing with these kind of sexy cards before I do it. And arguably, this is cooler art than this one, so I'll let you guys decide in the comments. Let me know if you think I should be running one or the other. So that's the Lightning Bolt. Then we have Lightning Strike, the cousin to Lightning Bolt. Skull Crack. Now, Skull Crack's in here for the very reason that players can't gain life this turn. Some people will try to gain life to get out of an issue. And much, much, much more importantly, this damage cannot be prevented this turn. So any damage dealt, once you cast this, can't be prevented. So it stops their life gain. Its damage is unpreventable, and it actually does 3 damage. And I have quite a few ways to do additional damage, so this is just an auto-include in a deck like this. Really, really clutch. Price of Progress. I did mention I would hurt you if you played non-basic lands, and here's how I do it. For 2 mana, I get to do 2 damage to each player for each non-basic they're doing. Mid to late game, this can cripple my opponents, absolutely crush them, because a lot of times they've got shocks out and duels and all the kind of, additional manas that are non-basic. This is a really solid card in this kind of theme. Then we have Mage's Contest. This is really just a fun card. There's definitely cheaper spells like REB and things like that. But this is, it's just tech. I just like it. For those that don't know, it's literally a counter spell with the caveat you have to pay the most life to get the counter off. And anyone can do it. So when I cast the spell, there's for it to resolve, I bid a life. And then any opponent can bid more life. And we keep going around until somebody stops bidding life. Now, the catch is, if I'm trying to counter something and they let me lose my life, it's countered. Congratulations. If they lose their life and I have Neheb out, this just gave me extra value, a lot of extra mana. So, again, not necessarily, this is more cheeky than anything. It's not a competitive piece. It can be countered again, stuff like that, Flusterstormed, whatever. But it's fun, and I got it in foil. Valakut Awakening, another newer card from Zendikar. This is basically another form of a wheel. It's based on how many cards are in your hand, but it's just another wheel, and I like it. And worst case scenario, it does flip into a non-basic land in case you're running light. So those kind of cards that are value like that can be a land or a spell, if they're remotely usable, I throw them into my casual decks. They're great fun. Next up, Risk Factor. This one is, there's several cards like this, and this one's kind of a cheeky one. Again, drawing is really hard to do in mono red. So this one says, look, if you don't let me draw, you're going to take damage. And I offer this to each opponent. So either they take 4 damage or I get to draw 3 cards. And we have the exact same thing in a card in my sorceries as well. So it's sometimes they take the 4 damage. It depends on what state the game is in. If they're really low in life, maybe they won't, maybe they will. But just kind of a fun little throw-in. Chaos Warp, auto include in almost any deck that has a splash of red because it gets rid of any permanent. Yeah, you give them a little value, but that's how red works. And then finally, Electro Dominance. This one is one of those fun ones for me where it deals damage, X damage, and you get a free cost spell out of it. So there's just a 1-2 punch here, because if I'm using it second main phase with Neheb, I can put 10 mana in there, do 8 damage to somebody, and get a free 8 drop. That's just rinse and repeat value. Really, really tight value for me. So those are my instants. Not enough in my eyes. I'd like to find a lot more, which leads me to the sorceries. And this is probably the largest amount of cards I have, because this is where the real magic happens in this particular deck. So we have our first, another lightning bolt, but this one's at sorcery speed. Faithless Looting. For those that don't know, this is a way to draw 2 cards and then go ahead and discard 2 cards. Something to be aware of, when you have that archive out, you're actually drawing 4 and only discarding 2. So there's extra value on a Faithless Looting with that kind of mechanic out. Lava Spike, again, another type of lightning bolts. This is a deck of lightning bolts, to be honest. Burning Inquiry, this is clutch, and a lot of people don't know about this. If you're playing a chaos form deck, like this is a lot of chaos, you don't really care what's in your hand, to be honest. You don't, because pretty much everything you draw is going to be value in some way or another. This will throw off every opponent on turn 1 or 2 if you cast it right away. And it's really easy to do. It's a 1-drop, and especially if it's early game and everybody, maybe they shuffle down to 4 or 5 cards because they want to have that clutch hand, and you get to get this off. My God, you can just annihilate people that have sculpted the perfect hand, and now they got to lose 3 of those perfect cards. So really, really key card. I like doing it because it's just chaos. It can throw me off too, but man, it's fun. Winds of Change, another one of those wheel type effects. This one literally just takes your entire hand and goes ahead and wheels it away, and you draw based on how many cards you previously had. Vandal Blast, great way to get rid of those artifacts. I told you, artifacts are easy to destroy, and this is one of those ways. Gamble, I see this all the time. Way more often than I figured I would, but it's almost always in one of my opening hands, and it's great. You get to get anything you want. And then somebody will randomly remove a card from your hand. So as long as you have more than, say, 3 or 4 cards in your hand, you've got a pretty good chance of keeping your clutch card and losing something else. I really like Gamble. Wheel of Fate, another easy wheel to get off. This one, of course, has a spend of 2, so on turn 2 you can get it going. Dump out the rest of your hand, and then by the time you're ready to refill, the wheel goes off. We have Sizzle. Sizzle is a sorcery that deals 3 damage to each opponent. So you can imagine launching this off in main phase 1. Again, I've done now 9 damage to each player, and now 9 damage total. Main phase 2, I get now 9 mana. Stupid value for the cost of only 3. Jessica's Wheel, again, a newer one from Commander Legends. Choose one. If you control a commander as you cast this, you may choose both. Add mana for each card in a target opponent's hand. So if people have a 7 full grip, that's a lot of mana. Also, exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So being able to exile cards is similar to a draw effect. It's not as good, but it does do some similar ideas. And again, you got to get kind of creative in mono red. Slagstorm. You can do 3 damage to each creature, or importantly, 3 damage to each player. Browbeat. This is another one of those either take damage or I draw cards. So depending where you are in the game, it can be used either way, and you're going to get advantage both times. I finally got this to work in my favor. This is Fiery Gambit. This is another gambling spell. This is not what I would put in a competitive deck. This particular one says flip a coin. If you lose the flip, absolutely nothing happens. If you get the flip in your favor on the first turn, first time you do it, it's a lightning bolt. If you get 2 flips in your favor in a row, you deal 6 damage to each opponent. That's amazing value. I got this off the other day. And finally, if you win all 3 flips, you not only untap all your lands, you draw 9 cards for some reason. It's nuts. 3 flips in a row, and this 3-mana drop can change your entire game. So much fun, and it's a gamble. And most people won't counter this just because it's a gamble, and they kind of want to see if it goes off, to be honest. It's entertaining as hell. All right, then we have the traditional Wheel of Fortune, and this is where I was thinking of making another big flex cut. I do happen to have the Judge foil, which is, I would say, just far superior in every way. But I don't know. I like to think that my decks earn the sexy cards that I put in them. So I kind of feel like maybe this has to earn a few more wins before I start putting in that kind of beautifulness right here. By the way, for those that don't know, the Wheel of Fortune was printed Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, and Revised. And before they closed the Judge loophole, there was a Judge foil created, similar to how Gaia's Cradle has a Judge foil as well. And then they closed that loophole, and now no more. All right, so there's the wheel. Then we have Insult and Injury. I traditionally only use it for the Insult ability, but it is another one of these damage can't be prevented. So this gets past the Glacial Chasm, it gets past the Fog effect, and then you do your damage. And then it also deals double that damage too, so it's just a 1-2 punch. Then we have Fiery Confluence. Again, this is a way to deal damage to creatures, opponents, or destroy artifacts, and you can do it a few times, so very, very useful. Then we have Seize the Day. Oh my God, the value with this particular card. I used it the other day. So let's say I have an attacking Neheb. He attacks, he does 4 damage. I use this spell, I untap it, I get an additional combat, an additional main phase, and I go ahead and do another 4. Now I have 8 extra mana floating, and I'll recast this from flashback and do it a 3rd time. You see where this is going? It's crazy, ludicrous value, and I really enjoy it. Corver's Fury. This is a fun one because you can kind of play friend or foe here. Hey, have you been good to me, or will you not counter this, or will you whatever? I'll let you choose. Do you want to do a wheel effect, or do you want to take damage based on your hand size? So really fun value, another wheel, another way to draw. But when you do these kinds of effects in the games where you give people a chance to make a choice, or you're gambling, people are less likely to target you down, especially when you're doing damage to everyone. They don't feel attacked, so they don't feel necessarily like responding. And that's what I like about group hurt, if you will. I guess that's what this deck is, group hurt. Speaking of group hurt, kaboom, my God, such stupid tech. So you choose any number of target players. I usually choose all my opponents. You reveal a card. Whatever you reveal for that player is the amount of damage that they will take. So you keep going until you hit a non-land. And let's say that the card I reveal is this. They take 5 damage. This goes on the bottom of your library. You move to the next player. It's just stupid ways of hitting people. But as you can see, that's kind of what this deck does. Then we have Explosion of Riches, my 3rd or 4th draw or take damage card. This is why Wheel of Misfortune belongs in here. Draw a card, then each other player may draw a card. If they draw a card this way, Explosion of Riches deals 5 damage to that opponent at random. So here's how nuts this card is. So, I want to play this. I haven't gotten this off yet. So I draw a card, okay? Each other player can draw a card. They may draw a card. When they do, we will randomly roll a die, and every time an opponent draws, someone, one of my opponents only, will take 5 damage. So it's like damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's so much fun. And again, it's random, which is kind of how this deck works. Fury of the Horde. I used this incorrectly the other day, but it was too funny not to. This is a free cast cost, as long as you exile 2 spells from your hand, to untap all your creatures and get an additional combat. And you've seen how additional combats followed by additional main phases are just ridiculous in this deck. So that's why this is in here. And then the last 2 cards, we have Molten Disaster. Now, this is a game finisher. If I've managed to generate 10, 20 mana, something stupid off this, which is not hard to do, the ability to do X damage to each player, especially if you kick it and make it split second so no one can counter it. Yes, this hurts me, but by the time I'm able to do this spell and do it effectively, I've probably got everybody else down to a much lower life total than myself. So I just have to pick the right life that's under me and kill my opponents, and that's the end of the game. That's where the X spells really come in play, followed by a very similar effect, Banefire. Does the same thing. As long as X is over 5, that damage can't be prevented, and the spell can't be countered. So just a clutch way to win at the end of the game. So that's this deck. This is Neheb. This may not be how you particularly build decks. This is just how I build decks. I like to go through my bulk uncommons, rares, commons, and just kind of go through them. Some people will prefer to get on the internet and go to things like EDH Rec and see what the popular builds are and get ideas, or just copy and paste. Everybody's got their own strategy. I prefer playing more casually than I do more competitively. I definitely have more competitive decks. But I enjoy not necessarily immediately knowing what I have to go for right away. I like knowing that the game can unfold in a completely unique way every single time for me. So that's more or less why I do it this way, and hopefully you enjoyed the little deck tech. I like to do these every once in a while. This is a brand new deck. This is Neheb. If you have any questions, comments, queries, ideas that I should maybe add to this particular deck, let me know. Leave some comments. And yeah, thanks for watching. Again, happy Thanksgiving to you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.